Shalom. Dear friends, I greet you all and I'm glad to see every one of you. Shalom to everyone. And today we're going to have a very interesting analysis of the personality of a Jewish rabbi, Rabbi Shaul of Tarsus, who is popularly known as the Apostle Paul. But today we'll try to understand who he really was and who he remained. Today, my friends, it's the third week of our course After the Flame. This course will continue, I plan to keep it going at least until the end of this year. This is just a part of the course that we'll be doing going forward. Don't miss these broadcasts. They'll help you understand the entire historical background of that era, and that way you'll be able to understand not only the scriptures better, but also the events themselves, which means you'll be able to grasp the scriptures on a deeper level. So, today we're going to talk about one of the most profoundly influential and, without any exaggeration, truly most tragic and deeply misunderstood figures in all of human history. This is the story of the Apostle Paul, who, in fact, is not actually called an apostle, nor is he really called Paul. Break time equals 0.5s/. See how simple it all is? We have knowledge about a certain person who, in reality, was someone else. I truly think that my illustrations today will certainly help you to fully understand exactly who we are talking about. In this image, on one side you see the traditional Byzantine icon of the Apostle Paul, and on the other side, his reconstruction depicting him as a Jew, a Pharisee in his prayer attire. This is exactly the perspective in which he exists. All the prominent heroes of the New Testament exist within this particular perspective. Matthew, John, Luke, Mark, and Pedia, who is also known as Peter. Break time equals 0.5s/. All the heroes are depicted from such perspectives. After all, we portray them in our own way, filtering them through the prism of our beliefs, but we should look at them through the eyes of those people and through the images of who they really were. If you look at this image, on the right you see a truly Jewish rabbi. He looks like that, he dresses like that, he looks that way, he speaks that way. And on the left, you can clearly see the one whom people have consistently seen throughout all the many centuries and ages. That's why when we hear this name, Paul, a certain image instantly forms in our minds. For millions of Christians, he is the greatest apostle, the author of nearly half of the New Testament. He is a pillar of the church. But for many in the Jewish tradition, and not only there, this name sounds very different. For them, Paul is an apostate, a man who took the teachings of the Jewish Rabbi Yeshua of Nazareth, tore them from their native soil, and turned them into something completely different. A new religion, a religion that, unfortunately, for centuries set itself in opposition to Judaism. So who is he, really? Is he a genius or a traitor? Is he a saint or a renegade? Our broadcast is called The Man We Lost. And in truth, we haven't just lost him, we've lost all the heroes of the New Testament. Paul's legacy is undoubtedly alive, but it is deeply divided. His writings have inspired saints, mystics, and reformers. But those same writings, taken out of context, have been used to justify the tragic rift between the church and the synagogue, and at times even for outright anti-Semitism. During this significant hour and throughout the entirety of our comprehensive course, I cordially invite you on a little intellectual journey, a profound journey back in time to meticulously strip away the centuries-old, deeply entrenched layers of theological debate and complex church politics from the enigmatic figure of Paul. I want to introduce you to a man whom I believe we have almost lost. This is Rabbi Shaul of Tarsus. That was his actual name. If we knew his father's name, for example, we could have said Rabbi Shaul ben, his father's name. But we call him Rabbi Shaul of Tarsus. Our goal today is not simply to justify Paul. Our goal is to understand him, to see him in his own world, in the world of Second Temple Judaism. And I will try to prove that Shaul never considered himself the founder of a new religion. Until his last breath, he saw himself as a faithful son of Israel, a Pharisee, an expert in the Torah, who received from God an incredible, unique mission to bring the message of the Messiah of Israel to the nations of the world. This is truly a unique idea, one that had not been revealed before him. We will go through his life together, look at who he was before his calling, analyze the essence of his mission, and in the end, we will hear his own final testimony about what he truly suffered for. After all, we have his own admission, his testimony about what he suffered for. He said it in his own words. Now, in order to understand Shaul's message, we must understand Shaul himself. And we shouldn't start with the blinding flash on the road to Damascus, but with a quiet study hall in Jerusalem. It all truly begins right there in that very same historic hall. After all, he himself gives us his resume in the epistle to the Philippians. And this is the resume of a brilliant representative of the Jewish elite. It's written for us in the epistle to the Philippians, chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel. We are mistaken to think that Paul abolished circumcision. I hear this all the time. People say, "Oh, Paul abolished circumcision." My friends, Paul, even if he really wanted to do it, couldn't do it because this commandment was given by the Creator himself. Besides, how can a man who is himself circumcised abolish his own circumcision? Or maybe, why then did he circumcise Timothy if he no longer saw any need for it? So, circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church. As for legal righteousness, that is, the righteousness of the Torah, blameless. This is written in Philippians, chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. These are his words. What does the phrase, a Hebrew of Hebrews, of the tribe of Benjamin mean? It's not just a statement of fact. It's a declaration of an impeccable lineage. Today, we practically have no people who can trace their ancestry back to those tribes of Israel. There are some families today who keep genealogical records, but in reality, there are almost none who know this for certain. Nevertheless, Paul knew his lineage. He specifically stated that this was the aristocratic lineage of the tribe from which King Saul of Israel came, that is, Saul after whom most likely our hero the Apostle Paul or Rabbi Shaul was named. This is a statement that he is part of the very heart of Israel, that he is a Hebrew of Hebrews. He didn't say, "I used to be a Jew," or "I was one." He said, "I am one." Then he said, "According to the teaching, I am a Pharisee," that is, a parish. Today, the word Pharisee is demonized. It has become synonymous with hypocrisy. In reality, that's just a caricature created by centuries of misunderstanding. I hear here and there how preachers say, "Pharisees." My friends, what do you know about the Pharisees? What do you know about the Parashim? In the times of Yeshua and Shaul, the Pharisees were the most respected and influential spiritual movement. They were not the temple aristocrats, the Sadducees. They were the people's teachers, passionately devoted to the idea that the holiness prescribed by the Torah is accessible to every Jew in their everyday life. They believed in what later became the foundation of Rabbinic Judaism, and also the foundation of Christianity itself. And what is this foundation? It is the immortality of the soul. This is a Pharisaic teaching. The resurrection of the dead, that is a Pharisaic teaching. The existence of angels, divine providence, and so on and so forth. This is the foundation of the Pharisaic school of Hillel. They studied not only the written Torah, but also studied the oral tradition and interpreted it. To be a Pharisee in those days meant to be a believer 24/7. Not just on Sundays, but 24/7, every day, all day long. Then he says, raised at the feet of Gamaliel. Raised at the feet of Gamaliel? Let me tell you, that's a big deal. It's a key detail in his resume. In the Acts of the Apostles, while defending himself before the crowd in Jerusalem, Shaul drops this phrase. He drops this phrase, raised at the feet of Gamaliel. This is Gamaliel the elder, Gamaliel the senior. He wasn't just any teacher. He was the grandson of the legendary sage Hillel. He was the head of the Sanhedrin, the Nasi, the supreme court and legislative body of all Judea, the most authoritative sage of his generation. Even more importantly, Gamaliel led the school of Hillel, which was renowned for its more flexible, humane, and open approach to interpreting the Torah, in contrast to the stricter, more rigid school of Shammai. It was Gamaliel who, in the Sanhedrin, advised leaving Yeshua's disciples alone and uttered his most famous phrase, "If this plan or action is of men, it will fail, but if it is from God, you will not be able to stop it. Be careful, so that you do not find yourselves fighting against God." We read this directly in the Acts of the Apostles. What does this mean for us? Saul of Tarsus. This means a great deal for us, that Saul of Tarsus received the best theological education available at that time. First of all, it means that he came from an aristocratic, an affluent family. Such an education cost a lot of money, just like today, for example, studying at Harvard or at one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. Costs a fortune. And only people who can afford it, let's say, are able to study there. Now, his family paid for this education for him. This was a theological education, available only at that time. He was an expert in scripture, in methods of its interpretation, and in complex legal debates. He wasn't just a simple craftsman who suddenly became a preacher. He was a first-class intellectual, a theologian to the core. It is written, as for zeal, he was a persecutor. And here the question arises, if he was such a brilliant student, why did he become a fierce persecutor of the new movement? The answer lies in the word zeal. Zeal in Hebrew it is one of the names of the Almighty. The Lord is a jealous God. This is not just malice or hatred. It is a passionate, burning desire to protect the holiness of God's name and the purity of Israel's covenant. From the perspective of Saul the Pharisee, the teaching that the Messiah is a crucified rebel, cursed by the law. After all, the Torah says, "Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree." This was monstrous blasphemy. What does this mean? The Messiah is a crucified rebel. After all, Yeshua was tried for rebellion. They put a sign on him saying, "King of the Jews." and executed him by Roman execution under a political charge. For Shaul, this was unacceptable. It was monstrous blasphemy. It was a dangerous heresy that could destroy the faith from within and bring down God's wrath on the entire people. He acted not out of hatred, but, as he believed, out of the highest form of love for God and his Torah. He was convinced that by rooting out this sect, he was doing God's work. What do you mean, some Jews believe in our great Mashiach? They take the name of the great Mashiach whom we are waiting for, and they say that this rebel against Rome is the Mashiach, the one who was killed. For us, this is unacceptable. We cannot accept it. That's how Shaul thought. But this was part of his delusion, not his hatred or anger. He was the best of the best, the most educated, the most zealous. That's exactly why a fall from such a height of righteousness would be so staggering. Let's move on to the next slide. And for us, this slide is very important. Conversion. We use this slang all the time. But in reality, it's not conversion, it's a calling. Conversion is moving from one belief system to another. Even in English, that's how it sounds. A Buddhist becomes a Christian, an atheist becomes a Muslim. Conversion is when you move from one state to another, from one faith to another, and so on. But Shaul did not convert from Judaism to Christianity. The concept of Christianity simply did not exist in the 30s of the first century. It was a movement within Judaism, so he wasn't going anywhere. What happened to Shaul is called something else in theological terms. It's a calling, a vocation. Remember this word, you'll need it, and I use it very often. Kraya. This is a divine revelation that does not cancel your past life, but turns it around 180 degrees and gives it new meaning. It is the atheists who need to be converted, the communists who need to be converted, anyone who needs to be converted. But Shaul did not need to be converted. He needed to show his recognition and calling. In exactly the same way Abraham was called, and so was Moses at the burning bush. The prophets of Israel, Isaiah and Jeremiah, were also called in this way. They saw visions and received a mission from God. They did not convert to anything and did not repent of anything. They received a new kraya, that is, a new calling. So what was revealed to Saul in that blinding flash? It was not a new religion that was revealed to him. What was revealed to him was a mystery that reassembled his entire world. This is a very interesting word, reassembled. It turns out that Yeshua, whom he was persecuting, is alive. And the resurrection from the dead, which is the central doctrine of the Pharisees, the one they defended in debates with the Sadducees, is not just a theory about the future. It is happening. And it turns out he wasn't stolen away by the disciples. In fact, he truly rose from the dead. And this happened to a specific person, to Yeshua of Nazareth. If this happened to the Mashiach, then it will happen to all of Israel. This is the greatest news. And therefore, Yeshua truly is the Mashiach of Israel. And his execution, it turns out, was not God's curse, but God's plan. And his resurrection is not just a divine confirmation of his status. That's it. And this is the greatness and the demonstrative majesty of the Creator himself. What is the Creator doing with him? Therefore, all his righteousness and, consequently, all his views about this man were mistaken. Not about everything, but about this man. He was a defender of the Torah. He fought against the anointed one of God. Now he has become an opponent of God, according to the words of his own teacher, Gamaliel. This revelation did not destroy his Pharisaic worldview. On the contrary, this revelation became the key that brought all the pieces of the puzzle together. Everything he believed in, the one God, the Torah, the prophets, the scriptures, the Messiah, the resurrection, suddenly gained its focus. His world did not collapse, not at all. It turned upside down and landed in its rightful place. And now his mission, his calling, was not to defend the Torah from the followers of Yeshua, but to bring the message about this Messiah to the whole world, just as the prophets had foretold. After all, the prophets had predicted this path. And now we come to the very heart of our discussion, to the most controversial and most important part of Shaul's legacy. Having received this incredible mission, he is faced with a fundamental practical theological question. Many Jews of that time faced this question. On what terms can Gentiles, non-Jews, join the people of God in the true Messianic era? If, according to Paul's faith and his words, this era has arrived, then what is the path now for the Gentiles? After all, they were idol worshippers just yesterday. They were rejected. They didn't even truly have a divine soul. Now, if the Mashiach has come, there is a way to bring the Gentiles to the Creator. The prophets of Israel, Isaiah, Zechariah, Amos, predicted many times that in the end of days, the nations of the world would abandon their idols and come to Mount Zion, joining Israel in worshiping the one God. We read about this countless times in the words of our prophets. So much has already been greatly written about this subject. After meeting the resurrected Mashiach, Shaul was convinced that the time had come. The prophecies are beginning to be fulfilled. But how? What is this supposed to look like in practice? If we take off our Christian glasses and look at the worldview and values that existed back then, we will ask ourselves this question. Up to that point, there was only one path for a Gentile. To become part of the covenant people, you had to go through conversion. This was a full-fledged procedure for converting to Judaism, which included 3 mandatory elements. Circumcision for men, immersion in a ritual bath, a sacrifice in the temple, and the observance of the entire Torah. Out of 100% of Gentiles who wanted to join this path, only about 1 or 2% were granted this opportunity. The rest were simply refused. The same situation exists today. If you go to any synagogue and say, "I want to undergo conversion, Jir," they will try to persuade you otherwise and discourage you, and you won't be accepted the first, second, third, or even the 10th time. Only if you show unwavering persistence in this matter, it will take years. Of course, it's impossible to bring in large numbers of Gentiles this way. With this approach, you might bring in one person, maybe 2, maybe 10, but not thousands. Essentially, a Gentile must die to their past and be reborn as a true Jew. This is exactly what both the Pharisees and Sadducees insisted on, as we read in Acts chapter 15. Their position was logical. This is completely Jewish logic. There is one people, one covenant, one way through the Torah and circumcision, through sacrifices in the temple, through observing the Torah. To us, this seems absolutely logical, but the path to this is endlessly complicated. Now, Shaul, based on his revelation and a profound analysis of Scripture, proposes something truly revolutionary. Before we analyze his arguments, by the way, what Shaul did back then is done today in many synagogues around the world. But before we analyze his arguments, let's jump to the very end of his journey. This will help us set the right framework for our entire discussion. So the book of Acts ends with Shaul's arrival in Rome. This is chapter 28, the last chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. I consider this book and this chapter to be very important. Now he is in chains under house arrest. And what does he do? The first thing he does is summon the leaders of the local Jewish community. He wants to explain himself to his brothers. And here are his opening words, his official statement, which is recorded in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 28, verse 17. Men and brothers, having done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers, I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans. Now let's pause for a moment. What is actually written here? This is being said by a man who was accused of treason, of abolishing the Torah. Hold on a second. This man is accused of undermining the very foundations of the faith of Judaism and the fathers. This is the man who taught the Gentiles not to observe the Torah and to abandon circumcision altogether. But it turns out, he says, I haven't done anything. At the end of his journey, looking the Jewish leaders in the eye, he declares, I have done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers, our traditions, our interpretations, our way. This is his final position. He sees no contradiction between his faith in Mashiach and Show and his loyalty to the Jewish people and their heritage. How is this even possible? This means that we are fundamentally misunderstanding something in his teaching. After all, Shaul never said that the Torah was abolished. Not for Jews, nor for Gentiles. He himself observed Jewish customs until the end of his life. He took vows, celebrated the holidays, ate kosher food. He even took Nazirite vows, which is a mega-challenging undertaking. Not every Jew back then could even manage to do that. You can't cut your hair, you can't shave. It's a very serious path. But his idea was something else. In the Messianic era, God opened a way for Gentiles to join. This path has to be different from the standard path because the standard path is the path without the Messiah. A long, endless conversion process that takes years. In the Messianic era, the joining of Gentiles. This is a new way that doesn't require them to become Jews. Literally, but to accept the Jewish path as a path of the heart. In other words, not to be, but to exist. When Shaul argues against the works of the law in his letters, he is not arguing against good deeds, that is, not against musar, morality, or commandments in general. His term works of the law or Masei Torah in his time often referred to specific marker commandments. There are marker commandments that visually and socially separated Jews from Gentiles. The Jewish way of life is accessible only to Jews. They are born into it, they live in it, and they are raised in it. To bring a Gentile to this way of life, you have to take them through years of learning. Now, circumcision, the dietary laws, kashrut, and Sabbath observance are the most important tenets, the pillars of Judaism. But if you try to bring adult people of the first century to circumcision, and through that, out of 100 people who want to do it, only one will agree, without anesthesia. In Rome, in fact, it was forbidden, in the Roman Empire, it was forbidden to perform circumcision on adults. Bodily mutilation. Jews shamefully called the circumcised. This is in the New Testament. And the circumcised who came from among the Jews. In fact, that's exactly what the Greeks called the Jews. They mockingly called them the circumcised. Shaul argued that these practices, which serve as boundaries of identity, are not required for the salvation of Gentiles or for their inclusion among the people of God. Required meaning at the stage of entry as an entry ticket for them. It's not just conversion to Judaism, but the entry ticket for them is turning to the Messiah, who essentially was the King of Israel. And everything else as a result of this faith will come gradually, tomorrow or the day after. Shabbat, Kashrut, and all the other commandments, at the center of which stands the Creator, are joined in the process. They are a condition. He brilliantly lays out this model of his in chapter 11 of the Epistle to the Romans. People simply don't know how to read it. Namely, what is presented there, a tremendous foundation. What do we see? We see a tree that is the people of God, Israel. We see the root that holds this tree. These are the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the covenant itself. We see the natural branches, which are the Jews themselves. And here are some branches that have accepted the Messiah. Excuse me, and here are the Gentiles, like branches from a wild olive tree, who were taken and grafted onto this noble tree. That is, grafted onto the root of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, grafted onto the trunk, onto the tree of Israel. That's how he saw it. Not to be grafted onto Rome, and not to the Protestant Reformation, which would happen thousands of years later, about which Paul knows nothing. Think about this metaphor. A branch from a wild olive tree does not become the root. It does not replace the trunk. It is grafted onto it and begins to draw nourishment from its sap. The Gentiles do not replace Israel. They join it, becoming participants in its heritage and its promises. They become part of the expanded commonwealth of Israel. They don't need to pretend to be natural branches. This happens naturally. At the very heart and center of this truly new and unified community is the Messiah himself, the Lord and Savior. And this vibrant community itself consists primarily of faithful Jews who are living in accordance with the sacred Torah, and also former Gentiles who have graciously entered into this fellowship through their profound faith in the Messiah and have subsequently come to embrace the very same divine Torah by which the Jewish people have always lived and continue to live. And there stands the King of Israel himself, who unites everyone. And it is the Creator himself who unites him and everyone. It was precisely this decision that was affirmed at the Apostolic Council in Jerusalem, where the apostles decided not to impose on newly converted Gentiles burdens that are too difficult to bear, but only to require them to abstain from the most essential things, everything related to idolatry and immorality. In fact, not to drink blood, not to eat strangled animals, and so on. What are these laws? These are the Noahide laws, the laws of Noah, the laws of the world of Noah. Today, after so many years, many central synagogues have Noahide classes. Why were these classes created? They are packed with Christians from various denominations. People come there to hear about the Torah. Why did the synagogue come to this? And why is it still coming to this? Why is this an inevitable path that will happen and will keep growing like a huge snowball, bigger and bigger? Because it is the time of Israel, and Christians don't want to be pagans. And they don't want to stand far away under the banner of a foreign tree. They don't want to be in new religions. And that's why Paul's mission was not to create this religion, but to manage the logistics of fulfilling the most ancient prophecies. So we return to the main question. Is Paul's legacy still alive? Of course, it's alive. For it to truly be alive, and not a distorted ghost of itself, we must bring it back home, to its Jewish world, to its Pharisaic logic, to its passionate love for its people and its God. Shaul said, "I am ready to give up everything, to leave it all behind, for the sake of my brothers, my kinsmen according to the flesh, that is, the Israelites." For centuries, Shaul's letters were interpreted through a Greco-Roman and later European lens. He was set in opposition to Judaism, turned into the banner of a new religion, free from the yoke of the law. This led to tragedy, to the theology of replacement, to the idea that the church has replaced Israel. This is a complete, absolute contradiction to what Paul himself actually taught. He would have been horrified by such an idea. We must not forget the words he wrote. Has God really rejected his people? Chaz vekalila, heaven forbid. The synodal translation says, by no means, but in Hebrew, it's chalila v'chaz. May heaven forbid even thinking about it. And here we are again with you in Rome. Back again to where we started. Right here. Shaul stands before leaders' Jewish community. He explained he did nothing against tradition's fathers. And then he says a phrase that personally I think is the key to his entire life. This phrase contains all of his ministry. It's the most precise, the most piercing description of his mission that you could possibly imagine. This is the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 28, verse 20. For it is for the hope of Israel that I am bound with these chains. There it is in essence. His whole life, all his journeys, all the beatings, all the sufferings, all the sleepless nights, all the complex theological treatises. Everything was for one thing. He was in chains not for Christianity. He was a hostage of the hope of Israel, what is called in Hebrew Tikvat Yisrael. What is this hope? It's not just a vague expectation of something good. It's a specific set of beliefs that has sustained the Jewish people for centuries. It's the hope that one day the promised king from the line of David, the Mashiach, will come to deliver Israel. It's the hope for the resurrection of the dead, the coming of the future age, Olam Haba. It's the hope that God will fulfill his promises made to Abraham and restore the kingdom. It's the hope that the light of the knowledge of the one Creator will shine from Zion to all the nations of the earth. The Gospel of Rabbi Shaul. It was not the abolition of Judaism. His gospel was the stunning news that Israel's age-old hope had begun to come true. It became a reality in the person of the Messiah from Israel. And now this hope, which once belonged to a single nation, has opened its doors to all of humanity. And if all of humanity can come to this, then there's no need to build obstacles to it. On the contrary, we should remove obstacles in order to allow all nations to come to the very root of their lives, to the Creator. Shaul's legacy is not a call for division. It is a passionate call for the nations of the world to join the great story of God's covenant with Israel through faith in his Messiah. In the upcoming and subsequent lessons of this comprehensive course, I will thoroughly discuss the significant letters to the Romans, the Galatians, and the Ephesians. I just want to ask you one thing. Don't read everything as a Christian text set in opposition to a Jewish one. Read it as a Jewish text written by one of the greatest Jewish minds to explain to the whole world the essence of the Jewish hope that has come true. At least that's what they believed. Maybe then we'll finally understand what this incredible man was really talking about. Rabbi Shaul of Tarsus, the prisoner of the hope of Israel. Thank you, my friends, for being here today and joining this course and these wonderful lessons. I thank each one of you. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what happened to those Judeo-Christian communities that tried to take a different path. We'll discuss the Nazarenes and the Ebionites, and our whole idea, our entire week, will be dedicated to the first community. That is, not the very first one we see in the Acts of the Apostles, but the community in the transitional period between the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries. And then we'll return again to Jewish history, which itself is a magnificent journey. And knowledge, thank you, my friends. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and donate. May the Creator bless your life. We'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.